Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar entitled Management of Root Diseases and Turfgrass, an adventure in timing and placement, presented by Envu. I'm Jesse Bonelli, and I am a member of the Envu Green Solutions team and will serve as today's moderator. Couple of housekeeping notes before I turn it over to Jim. We are recording this session, and you will receive an access of that recording in a follow-up email. All of your audio is muted, though we do encourage you to ask questions, and we'll address those questions at the end. You should be able to see a Q&A box located on the right side of your screen. You could just type in your questions there. A little bit about Jim, although he needs a very little introduction. Jim is a professor and extension specialist at NC State University, focusing on turfgrass pathology. Jim focuses on the ethology, epidemiology, and management of diseases of both warm and cool season grasses. His research program focuses on understanding the biology of ultra-dwarf Bermuda grass diseases, as well as large patch of zoysia grass, plant parasitic nematodes, and turf. And his program's mission is to provide efficacious and cost-cutting management strategies to turfgrass managers in North Carolina and beyond. So please join me in welcoming today's presenter, Jim Kerns, Ph.D.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you to Envu for hosting this, and all of those of you who decided to sign on or get the recording of this, and hopefully you get a lot out of this today. I know it's a little bit daunting to know that you could have people from all over the country when you try to cover specific things, but what I thought we would cover today is a little bit of the overview of some of our diagnostic lab results. I think when I think of managing root diseases, the first thing with any disease is you've got to get it diagnosed accurately. Okay, and that's either submitting it to a lab or, working with whomever to get that diagnosis, because, our fungicides can be quite specific these days. So I think that's absolutely critical. And then once you get the diagnosis, I think you need to understand, how do we get a fungicide to where it needs to be to manage these root diseases. And then depending on time, many of you know, if you've heard me before, I can get going and off topic at times, but some of the management of specific diseases, and I tried to flip back and forth, between cool and warm season diseases, because I know we'll have a gamut of those people on here. So before I get into the diagnostic summary, you see these photos here, and it's just absolutely critical that we don't guess when we're trying to manage these diseases. And we see this all too often, right? Of a picture going up on social media, what do you think this is? And I think it's a good start. But keep in mind that most of those diagnoses are wrong, if not almost all of them. And then you're determining how you're going to manage it from that, versus determining, with somebody. Of course, I'm biased. I think this gentleman here, Lee Butler, is the best in the business. He's looked at 15,000 or more samples in his career. He can give a pretty good indication, of summer patch here, or, take all root rot of what we need to be doing. So the bottom line is, I just wanted to show some trends from across the U.S. Since we are here in North Carolina, if you don't know, Raleigh sits about right here in the transition zone. It's a great place to be a turf pathologist because, we grow all grasses and we grow them all equally crappy. Bent grass struggles in our summers and Bermuda grass struggles in our fall, winter, and spring. So we don't have anything, I don't argue that anywhere is almost perfect, for, the exception of a few places, but every place can have their particular challenge. And so the trend that we see is essentially more and more root diseases that we have to manage. We still get a fair bit of bent and annual bluegrass, from all over. It is declining in North Carolina as our summers became more brutal, essentially, and Bermuda grass became more popular, but still have a fair bit in the state. And then, you see all over the country as well. So Bermuda grass, you see where we're getting those, right? Makes perfect sense. Kind of that line here in the southeast, and then 6% from out in the southwest as well. So we're seeing these trends all over the place. I think this is one of my favorite slides because everybody's in search of that perfect variety, right? Or that perfect grass. And you just don't see it, folks. Are all of these good grasses? Yeah, right. In their own sense, they're all fantastic for what they're needed to do, right? It's just the idea of breeding for resistance to root diseases is extremely difficult, right? I've heard some at Rutgers and other places say it's almost impossible. And part of the reason for that, folks, versus something like dollar spot or anthracnose, is a lot of these pathogens kill the host, right, before they even colonize the tissue. So there's not a interaction there that the plant can capitalize on. So don't fret too much about what variety or what cultivar, do that work yourself, plant some of those at your facility, and also understand you're still going to have to implement a robust, fungicide program to protect them, especially in areas where these things are prolific. So why do I hate, people sending photos? This is what we diagnosed in 2024 on bent POA greens. A laundry list here. Okay, but I think you see a lot of commonalities, right? Below ground of nematodes, fairy ring, root dysfunction, root rot, take-all patch, summer patch, right? But then you even go to like black layer and algae, all are really soil or below issues, okay? Moreover, why diagnosis is so important is 57% of what we receive isn't a disease. So even though we have some amazing fungicides, they ain't going to do much if there's not a bona fide disease there for them to suppress. So what are some of the things that we're seeing? Top 10. Okay, well, top 1 is no pathogen found. Okay, next, which actually I think is pretty interesting to me, nematodes. There are so many places, and I know Zach and I have had this discussion over and over again in turf, that people don't think these are an issue, and yet you notice it wasn't even in the top 10 in 2023. And we see more and more, especially root knot and, of distant second, lance on bent POA putting greens throughout the U.S. And that's concerning, right? Because we need to understand how to manage that, because I think we have a really good handle on how we manage sting nematode, for example, and we won't have time to get into that today. Root rot, actually no change from 2023. This is an amazing story because this was the #1 diagnosis of bent POA greens for 15 years. And you'll see why this has dropped down. And, you see summer patch has also dropped down. We've had, some really nice introduction of good chemistry. And I think timing to know when we get those out to have a really profound effect. Now, you do see this little slight increase in root dysfunction. Okay, all that means is we're seeing new construction. Okay, and that disease tends to show up, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the webinar. So this really doesn't change all that much, right? You see most of the root rot activity, May through July, Ph.D. This is the interesting one. To us, we have no data to support this other than observation, is a lot of these new varieties seem to struggle coming out of winter. And you see the patches that are associated with Pythium root dysfunction at that time, right? Cold, kind of drying winds. That's 10 to when we see it, and then it pops back up as we maybe dry in June and August, whatever it might be out there in the environment. So the bottom line here, folks, is when we're seeing these, we want to apply those fungicides, a week or two, or maybe even 3 weeks prior to when we see these symptoms in order to have an effect. Bermuda grass, okay? Notice very similar trends, right? Fairy ring, Pythium root rot, root knot nematode, spring dead spot, take all root rot, okay? Mini ring, all affecting below ground tissue, right? Whether that's the roots. I'm not convinced that ultra dwarfs really have roots per se, but affecting the stolons and nodes, right, where those roots do come out of, critically important to protect. Once again, diagnosis is absolutely critical. 46% of what we see isn't a disease. Okay, so unfortunately, we still see this take all root rot. We'll talk about this later today. But I'm not seeing it increasing, although we didn't see a decrease in 23. I still think there's some things that we're missing there. We had a little uptick in mini ring, a little downturn in Pythium root rot, but you see an uptick in root knot nematode. Okay, so once again, root knot may be something, and it is something our program is focusing on in the future to figure out, what is different about managing this particular nematode species. And then, folks, I think many of you, if you've heard me before, know if this is not an advertisement to spray something consistently like a Signature or a Peer or another phosphite, I don't know what is. And yes, that phosphite may not get rid of, any of these diseases by itself. But what I have learned, again, through our trial work and through observation, is people who are consistent with those don't have as bad of an issue with a lot of these things. They still might have them because Mother Nature always throws a curveball, but man, they really do add some substantial benefits, more than even plant health, which I'm convinced they add that as well, but they're also pretty strong fungicides. So we won't get into that much because I'm going to target the specific root diseases later, but I know costs could be an issue. And if, for me, on the ultra dwarfs, your summer is basically right here, July 15th through October 15th. And that's when I would not sacrifice and use something like a Signature or an Appear. It really does make a substantial difference in the quality and I think the disease management in the subsequent year. So let's talk a little bit about fungicide movement in the root zones, because this is critical. Why? Unlike maybe some insecticides and herbicides, fungicides don't move down into roots, with the exception, of course, of the phosphonates, right? Signature, Appear, other phosphites do move down, but every other fungicide that we're going to talk about does not. So we need to place these things appropriately. And what's really cool now is most of the research has shown that water volume for foliar diseases is really not as important as it used to be. That's likely due to the, better nozzle technology we have, the better sprayer technology. I think it has a lot to do with better fungicide formulations as well. Okay, that we've done work to show 1 to 2 gallons per dollar spot, leaf spots, Pythium blight. That's fine, right? As long as you're getting good coverage. So make sure you're doing that, right? Go to Amazon and buy a $35 packet of spray paper and ensure you're getting good coverage. Now, those of you, if you're out west and you're just managing 100% POA greens, and you don't want to come back and add more water because of water restrictions, this is where the 2 to 3 gallons could be important for things like anthracnose, because POA's root system isn't very robust. You may even get some good summer patch suppression. Or those of you dealing with the anguina gall nematode, maybe Zach could comment on that later. Maybe that's enough because of where it occurs. But, you know, that's really a specificity there. Or large patch in zoysia grass, right? In warm season grass, you really need to do 2 gallons, and work that Jesse Benelli did with Brandon Horvath clearly demonstrated that good fungicides will fail if you don't get to the appropriate water volume. And then, you know, I love this when I'm in a room with you all to say, how many of you would do 5 gallons per 1,000, and nobody raises their hand? So that's why we suggest watering it in with 1/8 of an inch of irrigation, right? Because all of the activity is right in here, okay? The nematode activity, Pythium, root rot, summer patch, you know, you may think it's happening down in here. No, it's not. And getting fungicides into this layer is a challenge, okay? So I want you to think, before I talk about the specific research, you know, many of you probably have this situation. Do you have a fairy ring on a fairway or an approach or a putting green or an athletic field or whatever that you just really struggle to get rid of? Because there really shouldn't be any excuse for fairy ring. I mean, we have amazing fungicides to manage fairy ring, but what happens? Likely that fungus is living down here, right? And getting a fungicide to it can be next to impossible without poking some holes, you know, liberally watering it in with a hose and a wetting agent tablet, right? So that's why I think some of us still struggle with that particular disease. It's just to highlight movement. So this is not complete. This is a little bit old now. Actually, Wendell Hutchins put this together for me when he was a student with us. And, you know, the idea is fungicides are classified basically as moderately mobile to immobile in soil. They just don't readily move, folks. Even though you see some that are 163, right, 365, fluopyram at 266, it doesn't matter. They all pretty well get stuck very quick, right? And so we'll show you how that, you know, translates here in just a minute. So as I mentioned, water volume doesn't really matter, okay? You look at Secure, great control here. It got better as we reduced water volume. Makes sense when we're using a contact. Okay, you look at Maxtima though, right? No difference amongst the dollar spot control with the different water volumes. All right. Now, I know somebody's going to ask a question about resistance, I suspect. You know, yes, can we develop resistance? That's what happened here with Exemplar. We have insensitive populations at our farm. So it didn't really matter in this particular case. So water volume, I'd say pick what makes you most efficient, because I'm going to tell you to water it in, and we'll walk through how much and when. Okay, so this was part of Wendell's graduate work when he was with us. What we did here was basically build these little cylinders that are coated on the interior of the plastic with like a coarser gravel, and then packed with a 90% sand and 10% peat by volume. Okay, we added myclobutanil, radio-labeled myclobutanil, to the surface of that soil, no plants, and then imposed either no irrigation, 1/8, quarter, half, or 1 inch. And it's still to this day, it really blows my mind that 50% of what was applied remained in the top 1 inch of soil with the application of myclobutanil. And you see, you're getting, yeah, some down at that 1 to 2 inch depth, but you notice no differences amongst the irrigation treatments. Okay, that the 1/8 was just the same as a quarter, half, or 1 inch, right? And you're looking at this, I know some people probably say, this isn't drastic. Okay, but you're thinking of this in percent, whereas in the funguses, in the eyes of the fungus, they're looking at it in parts per million, or even in some cases less than that, right? So this is the difference of good control or not in many instances. So the other question we always get about this, well, I don't want it to move too far. Well, you see it's not, right? Very little collection at 3 to 4 inches and zero collection below that. So if, just as an example here as an image, here's non-inoculated creeping bentgrass on the left. This is inoculated with the summer patch pathogen, treated with either azoxystrobin or propiconazole, I can't remember which. Both excellent for summer patch. Notice with no irrigation, terrible control with a 10th, no difference between the 1/8 and the 1/4, right? So the bottom line, folks, when you're managing these soil-borne diseases, don't guess at how many minutes. Figure this out. I'm told, with these newer irrigation systems, this should be easy for you all to program this in as well and get it down as quickly as you can, right? And so this was work that Cam Stevens did when he was with us, right? Taking this a step further to do it out in the field. So this happened to be Valista. We also looked at Balaton and Insignia. And I'm only showing one because it was pretty much the same story. Now, what was cool about this was you notice we collected very little in the clippings. Okay, so that was different than previous studies. And, taller heights of cut, you do collect more in the clippings, upwards of, 15 to 20% in a lot of cases, but we weren't seeing that at a putting green height. So this RAV, what is this? This is everything that isn't removed with the mower or that we couldn't remove with scissors at the bottom of the organic layer, right? So you notice no irrigation here, right? Almost 95% of the material staying up in that zone versus, maybe 90, 89% with watering 6 hours later or doing what I hear people say, watering that evening. And then here's watering immediately, right? Getting 70% of that product or 30% through that layer. And the other thing as you look at this, right, look at how these things decline, right? And some people get really caught up on half-lives of fungicides, and work that we have done and Dr. Latin and others show that, in a biological system, these fungicides don't stick around as long as their half-lives are, which are done in more inert systems. Okay, so you see 0 to 1 inch soil, immediate irrigation, drastic difference. But at least watering in that evening is better than doing nothing at all. And once again, very little collected in the 1 to 2 inch, right? Next to nothing in the 2 to 3 inch, all right? So that, I think, illustrates those fairy rings that are down deeper, why they're challenging. Or, work that was done by us, by Dr. Glenn Gully, showed that sting nematode, when it gets hot, goes deep, right? So that's why we have to target them around certain soil temperatures, because we're never going to get products to where they need to be. Now, do wetting agents help? Absolutely, they do. If you remember this 2 to 3 inch depth, this was work done by Wendell Hutchins again. We only had 8 to 10% of the active ingredient. In this case, we had over 20. Okay, we didn't see differences in the wetting agents. The key for us, folks, is it took 2 weeks to work. So what I would like now is to have people, when you're thinking of starting your take-all root rot or take-all patch or summer patch or nematode, that 2 weeks prior to that, you've already started a wetting agent. So we help facilitate that movement down into the root zone, okay? Now, we moved on and did this with Segway. The only reason we did this in Cam's work, we only did 1/4 of an inch because we were worried that in a putting green, and especially our putting green at Lake Wheeler, we had a pretty severe organic layer. So we were just looking at that movement. And what we found when Daniel Freund focused only on a single product, no difference between an 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch. But there was a significant difference between watering in immediately or waiting until later that day. So the best practice is 1/8 of an inch of water and do it immediately. Okay, and I understand some of you may have greens that it may puddle after a few minutes. Well, right, water it, let it puddle, stop, let it infiltrate, water it again until you get to 1/8 of an inch, right, would be what I would ask you to do. Now, some folks have asked, do these things, can they run off? Because, the work we're doing is on flat greens. And very good question. And we have not really done this in the Southeast. Really, I've never seen this much anywhere on putting greens. If somebody has, please send me the reference. I'd love to see it, because this was interesting work from, I think, done up in the upper Midwest in 2018, looking at runoff from a golf course fairway, applying flutalanyl and PCNB for snow mold control. And I think the interesting bullet here is the third one, that even with 109 minutes at a rate of 1.4 inches an hour, less than 5% of either product was detected in runoff. And the soil moisture in the study averaged 37%. So that's pretty extreme and very little running off. So I think we're okay with these things not running down slopes. However, there are other things that you're putting out that may have the potential to run down a slope and accumulate.
Hey, Jim. Hey,
yeah.
Jim, sorry, there's a question in the chat that it's just very timely since you're on that subject. The question is, and I hear this one too, interested in your answer, is I'm spraying for summer patch. Is it okay if I just bump my carrier volume to 5 gallons per 1,000 of a carrier volume? Do I still have to water in, or would that be good enough?
That is a very good question, Jesse, and whomever asked it. I think that depends on what you're managing summer patch in. I think if you were doing that on annual bluegrass, or even, you think of a Kentucky bluegrass tee or approach, I think the 5 gallons would be sufficient. On creeping bentgrass, I don't think it would be. I would prefer to do 1 or 2 gallons and water it in with 1/8 of an inch, just because it is a little bit deeper infection on creeping bentgrass based on observation. But if people are willing to do the 5 gallons, I think on especially annual bluegrass, I think that would be sufficient.
Okay, thanks.
Perfect. Yeah, and Jesse, if others pop up after things, that's fine. Get them out.
Okay, will do.
So, Pythium diseases, okay? There's a lot of them. I'm sure many of you have heard at times me talk about various ones of these, or Lee Miller or Brandon Horvath or whomever, right? Not going to talk about blight today, but I know for the recording, I thought this would be nice just to throw up. And this isn't updated as well, and I apologize because I need to add in Resilia in here, because we've had a couple good years both with root rot and root dysfunction with that particular product. So just having these in, yes, multiple different diseases here, but I want to focus in on Pythium root rot, right? This is typically only a putting green disease, but we do see it occasionally elsewhere. Tends to be more centralized to sand-based systems or highly top-dressed systems. Okay, many different species cause it. I just say now it's induced by wet conditions, because you can see root rot here show up in March if we have enough moisture. You can see it even on ultra-dwarf Bermuda grass occasionally in December and January if the conditions are right. Now, traditionally, annual bluegrass and creeping bentgrass were most susceptible, but man, we see a lot of it on Bermuda grass and seashore paspalum as well. We've also documented it some on some of the newer zoysia grasses too. So nothing is really immune from this particular disease, unfortunately. So these things develop during very wet weather, patches, spots like this, okay, tends to start pretty small. If you're lucky, you can kind of see them moving down a slope, right? Or, spreading in a drainage pattern as it looks like it's doing here. It can be a tricky disease because we think of it being more irregular, but it can develop in, more distinct patches. You might think this was summer patch or microdochium or something else, right? But it can show up in distinct patches as well. You really need to get a laboratory diagnosis to confirm this. I've really never changed this photo that Bruce sent or allowed us to use, Martin, because it just shows what it's doing so well, right? The organisms are attracted to root tips, they infect, make their way in, basically rot everything, and that plant is going to collapse at the immediate first sign of stress. Okay, that thing is dead. This is greasy, slimy. And then why do we talk about prevention and continued prevention of this? Okay, well, these organisms are really handy, right? They're really good at survival. And so this is the oospores, or as Lee Miller calls them, the spores. And it's a really good way to say this because you don't want this. This is an because these build over time and really over seasons. And if we don't consistently preventatively manage, you can build up enough inoculum to where things don't work as well as they should. Okay, so this is why we always continually say prevention, right? Managing organic matter, all of these things. Okay, so what do we have to manage it? Now, first, as I show any slide here, any data slide, all of these treatments are watered in immediately with 1/8 of an inch of water. So preventative application for many years, Segway was our go-to, right? You see here working very well at 0.45 every 14 days, no different from 0.9. We like the addition of other materials with it. So this is a tank mix union here, 2.9 and 5.75 applied preventatively. Flawless, right? Both on a 14 and 21 day interval. Fantastic, okay? And once again, I'm highlighting before the epidemic, right? May 21st here is typically about a soil temperature of about 65 degrees, and that's when I like to start for Pythium root rot. Showing you non-treated control, union doing very well here. Okay, the scary thing there is, we had Segway that was really the only bullet. And so as our summers got longer and harder, right, I think that's one of the main reasons in the South we decided to convert to Bermuda grass. We didn't have enough chemistry to keep root rot at bay, and then serrata comes out. Okay, once again, you'll notice 0.6, no different than the 0.8. We were testing at one time a higher rate, didn't matter, right? So fantastic control, right? And you see coupling it with Segway here in just a minute. I mean, beautiful. Zero root rot. If you look over in this photo and you see just I know none of you like this, but I love this. I mean, this is just epic destruction. And to see, islands of green there with just two, with these are what, 1, 2, 3, 4 applications. So 2 apps of Segway, 2 apps of serrata, and we got 100% control in probably the worst environment I can think of for Pythium root rot, because we overwater this. We do everything wrong. Now you see we're getting suppression, from Banol as well. So we can, add that into the mix. So with the chemistry we have for root rot now, man, we can almost manage bentgrass in Houston, Texas, I think. And showing you here, but again, I think really starting before those soil temperatures consistently get to 70 degrees or above is key to minimizing Pythium root rot damage. And you see that, isn't that just lovely? I mean, I just absolutely love that. I know Zach's laughing at me right now because he doesn't think so, but I just love that. Here's another thing I love when we get programs and they want us to distinguish them from each other. And then I get put on the spot because my program actually ended up not doing the best here. But this was the point of starting your season off strong, right? So they started with Resillia, which is a mixture of prothioconazole or Densicor, Indemnify, and Banal. Okay, now one caveat on this creeping bentgrass area, folks, is we had substantial sting nematode populations, right? So it's no surprise, I think, that we got, I mean, just an amazing result when you look at these plots, okay, by starting off, with something to reduce everything, right? Sting nematode, summer patch, fairy ring, and, getting some early Pythium activity as well, compared to these non-treated controls. Okay. Also, right, I think it's a pretty simple program when you see it. You move into Signature and Daconil through the summer, a couple timely apps of Mirage, of course, the Serrata, and then for foliar control, that interface. Okay. We did all right, but we struggled early on, right, as you see here, because of that sting nematode presence, and we didn't have anything managing that nematode. Okay. Once again, another great program to see Serrata Segway doing very, very well. Programs put together, of Signature and DAC Action, very, very good, or even a more robust program of Resillia, Serrata, and they were looking, I know Envu was looking at one time at Castellan, but this is Fame, right? I mean, that's a really strong program there, folks. Even one, if you doubt the influence of a phosphonate product, okay, I mean, this treatment, Heritage and Subdue Max, shouldn't withstand this kind of pressure. And it did, and I think the reason why is the addition of the phosphonate, right? So, yes, do not ignore Signature and Appear in this. This is absolutely critical in a disease management program. Finally, with this, don't go at it curatively. We get really good curative control. This is excellent curative control of root rot. But this sucks when you think of a golf course putting green to still have 20% of your area covered with disease, right? So very, very nice products here, but curatively, it could be too late with root diseases, right? And that's the other main thing, watering in prevention. Because once, and I know you're going to get bit at times, you have to have the expectation. I think Zach said this in an email to us. It's really true of, where are you in the growth potential of your host, right? If you're growing well, your recovery will be quick. In the summertime for creeping bentgrass, where this trial was done, recovery is not going to be fast. For you ultra dwarf Bermuda grass folks, in September and October, your recovery is not going to be fast, right? That we have to understand that going in, that, yeah, I may look at these symptoms for a little while, but the fungicides you applied had an effect. And you see, we did it 3 times, and yet we were never able to get it even below 10%. So I'm going to do a couple little quick skips because I've already talked about it, but this is that start date, right, of why we're somewhere between 65 and 70 degrees for timing of Pythium root rot control. And, as you think of, especially, I have this up for cool season, what products or product can give you all of these, right? And, that's where these pre-mix products are critical, okay? Like a Resillia, like a Brisquet, like a Navicon, Lexicon, right? Because we can get a lot of bang for our buck on those particular diseases, right? So I'm a huge proponent of writing programs that start with these materials, right? And especially ones that incorporate a DMI early, okay? Because the DMIs give you really, really solid control of these, and then we can add something in to make sure we're getting good Pythium root rot suppression. Now, those of you, if you have new putting greens, if you happen to see root dysfunction, okay, number one, it's only been officially documented on creeping bentgrass putting greens. The infection occurs during the fall and spring, and the symptoms have traditionally been induced by summer stress, but it's also any kind of stress. If it's cold, dry during the winter, whatever it might be. Do we have options for you? Absolutely. Our old options were, Segway and Insignia, and in this trial, Segway did all right. Insignia did not perform well, but Serrata performed very, very well. And then if you mixed it with Fame, right? Not that the Fame added anything, but it's the idea of programs, right? The Fame is adding in what Serrata isn't giving us. So lots of options there, and I didn't have it for this particular talk, but we also have new data that Resillia has performed very, very well for root dysfunction, and we see it again in a trial this year, although it's very early. So that's another option that we have to start our season off with, and maybe even end in the fall. So major issues of ultra-dwarf Bermuda grasses. And I'll only probably get into one of these. I think the major issue with ultra-dwarf Bermuda grasses is none of them produce a lot of roots. Okay, so this is a study we've been doing, just collecting root length, thatch depth, and the amount of dry weight that is produced throughout the season, right? And you see, you can see why you're looking at symptoms late in the year, right? You're not having much production at all. We get a spike in, April, May, and June, July. So that's when these things may recover, right? But you see not a lot of differences either amongst the different cultivars. Thatch depth, not too many differences either, at least none that I think is worthy to write home to mom about. And then dry weight, once again, right? We're only putting on a little bit during that May and June period. And so the other issue with the ultra dwarfs is I've already told you that, this July through October is critical. And so I can only speak on our experience in the Carolinas, but when you're managing this and wherever you are with an ultra dwarf, here's the issue. If you're coupling these average soil temps that are conducive for mini ring, for take all root rot, with increased rainfall like we saw last year in the Raleigh area, we're asking for essentially failures or potential fungicide failures. Okay, so I'm arguing this because 28-day intervals do not work for these in our experience, right? That we have to incorporate maybe a 21-day or do a 28-day of what I call a big gun and insert something smaller in the middle, because this is really hard to keep fungicides around under these types of conditions. So take all root rot. All right, probably the only one I'll be able to get to today, but we can, answer questions about some of the other ones. But big one here, right? Multiple pathogens causing it. You see the symptoms here of white patches. Okay. It's active. The fungus is active when soil temps are between 86 and 68 degrees. Okay. So that window I just showed you in that slide, right, from about August 1st to October 1st is when it's prime time for infection for these pathogens. Okay. It's most severe when manganese is limiting with high pH and seems to be associated with bicarbonates in the irrigation water, right? Here's the frustrating thing is if you look at this, you could see this in January or February, and you'll send in a sample, we'll find the pathogen, and people get really upset because we'll say, there's no point spraying anything. And the reason why is because the fungus isn't active below 68-degree Fahrenheit temperatures. And why is that important? Well, Rick Lattin has shown numerous times and demonstrates it in his textbook that fungi have to be actively growing in order for a fungicide to work. Okay, so just critical that we prevent this and hit that timing well for take-all root rot. We see it more than just Bermuda grass. We see it on seashore paspalum. We've documented this on the newer zoysia grasses as well. And we've seen this in certain fairways and athletic field situations, typically where the soil is sandy, right? It is linked with nematode feeding, and it's primarily affecting nodes in those primary stolons, okay? Just a couple quick skips here just to, get to some more management. This was some interesting work, I think cool work that Brandy Merrick did when she was doing her master's with us, looking at the influence of nitrogen source at 3 pounds of N per 1,000 square feet per year. We picked the low end because that's what we saw in our trials, that 3 pounds was sufficient enough to reduce or keep take-all root rot at about 10-15%. And you see in this case, ammonium sulfate is comparable to the non-inoculated control. So those of you dealing with take-all root rot, this may be a fertilizer source you look at, and more importantly, potassium nitrate, because we look at the dry weight results, you see it's comparable to the non-inoculated control again in terms of the amount of dry weight that we're putting on, right? So I think we can develop programs there. Now, those of you that deal with mini ring, okay, you're going to want to focus on urea, right? But we don't know. Actually, Dr. Joe Roberts is moving into this to see if potassium nitrate may play a role with mini ring as well. We don't know that, okay? I want to see this disease go away because we have really amazing fungicides for it, right? A whole laundry list here, right? Brisquet, Headway, Navicon, Tartan, Maxtima, Heritage, Calida, Lexicon, right? Moving forward, we have Densicor, right? Prothioconazole, Rayora, performing very, very well. The key, folks, is like on Brisquet here, the 1.2 ounce rate is critical, right? The 0.72, at least in our trial work, has not performed well. The 1.2 performs very, very well. Some other options, right, that are pretty cool. I have never seen this before in our work until last year, but Fame by itself did really well for take-all root rot. Okay, I don't know, why that is, because these organisms are all sensitive to the QOIs, but at this particular site, Fame did very, very well, and it's consistent throughout the trial. Two others that, and I'll credit Jesse to this. This was his study, I think, that he submitted that we did last fall. Resillia has kind of become a very good standard for take-all root rot control. We had really good control with Resillia with 4 monthly apps, and then the low rate of Mirage at 0.6. So, you can insert the Mirage in between those dates, and that would give us, I think, control of everything we see on ultra dwarf Bermuda grass putting greens, with the exception of we may need to add in a Segway or Serrata for Pythium root rot when those conditions develop. So manganese here also played a good role in suppression. Now, we did this all at one shot, but you see, worked very, very well for especially Gammanomyces graminis. Not quite as well for Graminicola, but still did good. Can't stress this enough as we near the end here, monitoring your soil temperatures, right, for all of these diseases, right? And the idea is mini ring is active at this same time. You're, at the end here getting preventative fairy ring. Our nematodes are probably coming back near the surface. Root knot may be becoming active again, right? So you see where timing this is so important with soil temperatures. And I think we do this better with cool season putting greens than we do ultra dwarf Bermuda grass. So in the interest of time, I'll do a few skips just to get through some others real quick. Summer patch can look very different on cool season putting greens, whether this is creeping bentgrass and 2 different golf courses here in the Raleigh area, picture that Lee Miller had, and a couple quick skips here. Just, yes, it infects creeping bentgrass. Hey, manganese plays a role with it. So those of you annual bluegrass, Kentucky bluegrass, creeping bentgrass, probably a good idea to add supplemental manganese applications. What works? Lots, right? So this was, work done from Bruce Clark, Pillar, Exemplar, Lexicon, Honor, Heritage, all worked really, really well. Honor, Heritage, okay, doing well in our trials, right? Basically, we have a lot of everything that works well for this, right? The QOIs are flawless and it's true whether it's Heritage, Insignia, or Fame in our work. Okay, so what do we do here? Target 65 degrees. The 2 applications for take-all patch and the spring don't cut it. You may need more, right? Some of the areas like in, more central coastal California, you may need them all summer long because you never really get above, 80-degree soil temperatures. And summer patch can infect up to 95-degree soil temperatures, right? So warm weather pathogen here, okay? So another quick little skip to leaf and sheath spot to finish up. I think some of the issues with mini ring is this name. It doesn't affect the leaf and sheath based on our experience. Luke Dancy saw the sclerotia and hyphae down in the root, right? Activity very similar to take all root rot. So during this time, we need to irrigate in our fungicides. And I think that may be a mistake with mini ring. So other things that play a role, limited growth of the ultra dwarf Bermuda grasses, right? It does appear linked with nematode feeding, right? Overregulation could enhance symptoms, and it seems to be associated with really good water quality. So Dr. Roberts is looking at a follow-up of, what nutrients could be playing a role. What works? Densicor, Mirage. We've had really good luck with prothioconazole. We had good luck with Rayora, right? So it does seem to be DMI focused. I know Joe Roberts has seen good results with Navicon and Brisquet. We haven't quite seen the same results. I mean, it's been close, but not quite there. But let me finish on this of, look at a preventative program where we started on ultra dwarfs June 2nd, right, all the way to spring dead spot, and look at the control here compared to the non-treated. Okay, so yes, we can manage these things well if we get these targeted applications out there. And this was even before, Resilia or Timeria, more newer products coming out for nematode control, right? So even though we did include the nematicide, all right, it was just as good, but in this case, we didn't have as high of nematode numbers. So that's why I think we just saw the fungicide program do well. So with that, if there are any questions, and sorry for some of the technical issues. I don't know if my computer was just not liking Teams, but any questions?
Yeah, Jim, there are a couple of questions, and some of these I have received as well, but great questions. This has to do with applying wetting agents. Is it better, in your experience, to apply a wetting agent with the fungicide? or is it better to apply the wetting agent before the fungicide application in an effort to get things moved down?
So very good question. I think as long as they do the wetting agent before the fungicide and then 2 weeks before, and then yes, go ahead and mix the follow-up wetting agent application with the fungicide. The only reason I say that because I know Bill Kreuzer, I think, is showing that wetting agents may not last as long as we think, and a 2 to 3 week interval on those is probably sufficient. But to me, I think our work was pretty clear that we need to start a wetting agent program before the fungicide program.
Okay, awesome. So question number 2, there's a few of these. Would you say, this was in your Pythium root discussion, would you say have you seen Resilia perform better at managing Pythium root diseases than Banol?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Have we seen it perform better than Banol for our Pythium root diseases? And I would say yes, we have. It's an interesting product because we've seen it perform well on things that I didn't expect it to. That being one, and we had really, really good results with it. For Pythium root dysfunction, we've had limited control with Banol in that. So yes.
Okay, and take all root rot. So we've seen it in your diagnostic summaries where you guys are diagnosing take all root rot pretty much throughout the entire growing season. Would spring applications provide benefit to take all root rot, or should they wait until late summer, early fall?
Yeah, very good question. I think depending on where you are, the spring applications could be beneficial. Just because of if you have high pH, poor quality water, you're going to struggle more, I think, with take all root rot than other areas. Now, when I say that, I look at, you do put your biggest bullets in that late summer, early fall, but then you come back with some of the other materials, in the spring of the year. Whatever that could be, it just really depends. But yeah, I do believe it has an effect, and you still need to go out and put something out for preventative fairy ring in the spring. So pick something that we know is giving some take all root rot activity as well.
Okay, and the last question is Pythium root rot. I know we talk about it more on bent grass, but as you said, you've seen this on Bermuda grass. When should guys be think about starting a Pythium root rot management plan on Bermuda grass putting greens?
Yeah, very good question, and I apologize. I thought I'd stuck that in there. But essentially, I think it's about the same time as take all root rot and mini ring, right? I think it's when we start to get into the fall. If we get substantial rainfall, not even substantial, really, just rainfall. I would advocate if you're going out with something, like a Densicor, a Maxtima, or Brisquet, that you mix in a Segway or Serrata with it. Or in between the Resilia apps, if that's what you decide to do, you come back in with a DMI, Serrata, Segway application in there. The nice thing I've seen with root rot on the ultra dwarfs is it seems like the ultra dwarfs can overcome it a little bit faster than take all and definitely mini ring based on our experience. But I still think definitely that late summer, early fall to put those in.
Okay, thanks. And they do keep coming in. Summer patch. You mentioned that it can infect creeping bentgrass. The pathogen that causes it can infect creeping bentgrass. Have you diagnosed it much above the transition zone? So Northeast, Midwest, Ontario. Have you seen any summer patch that far north on bentgrass?
We have seen summer patch on bentgrass, in higher elevations. out west. We have seen it in Ohio. We have seen it in Indiana. I think parts of Illinois. I'm not sure about Ontario, but we have, I think they've seen it in New Jersey and New York, and can see it in areas in the Northeast occasionally. One thing though, I don't think they may have seen it up there, because remember, a lot of the products you're using to combat anthracnose, right, and other diseases are also probably giving you good summer patch suppression as well.
Okay, and this one is, are there any SDHI fungicides in the trial phase that has efficacy on take-all root rot?
Are there any SDHIs that have efficacy on the on take-all root rot in the trial phase? Yeah, we have seen efficacy out of Acernity. Now, Acernity is a mixture of salatinol and difenconazole, but in some in vitro screening work, we have seen some suppression with salatinol. And I'm drawing a blank, but I think we have seen another one in some work, but I'm not entirely clear I know what it is yet. But it is a good point to bring up that the rest of the SDHIs have little to no effect on take-all root rot.
Yep. Any other questions, guys? Reading through the chat. Well, Jim, I can't thank you enough for powering through this presentation. And a reminder for all of the attendees that we will get a copy of the slide deck if Jim is okay with that, and we'll send it your way, as well as a recording of the presentation. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.